Well, it's been 11 and a half years since September 11th, but the story is even more relevant today in many ways because we've seen it used to justify wars, we've seen it used to destroy domestic liberties and create a police state, a surveillance state here in America. Well, our next guest is someone who successfully got 9/11 information into a court in the UK for the first time. His name is Tony Rook, and his website is killingantifilms.co.uk. And here to fill us in on the details of that trial and tell us about his next project is Tony Rook. Well, welcome, Tony. Tell us about that trial that just happened there, where you got the evidence put in.
Yeah, the Horsham trial, very interesting. It was an avenue that I discussed very briefly with Tim Spark, who I think was a producer on one of the Loose Change movies, Final Cut, I think. I rang him a few years ago and said, listen, I think there's an opportunity here to get the 9/11 material into a courtroom, because in England, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers will know, we have this ludicrous thing called the TV license, which is £145 a year for the honour of watching the television and being lied to. And I said, well, listen, the BBC has a royal charter and also editorial guidelines, so they do have legal restrictions on what they can and can't say. And obviously after 9/11, lots of things came to light, specifically, which is what we concentrated on with the court case, was World Trade Center 7. I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but really the fact that they broadcast the collapse of that building 23 minutes or so before it occurred, they've never given us the original source for where they got the story. They've since said it was the Reuters news agency, but that's not the original source. That's just the agency that provided it. That was the evidence that we really sort of went in on. We didn't concentrate so much on the Twin Towers. We just concentrated on Building 7. And I haven't paid a TV license in this country for some time now, an awfully long time, since around about 2006. Now that would automatically get a £1,000 fine. And anyway, this guy turned up at my door one day and said, "Where's your TV license?" I said, "I don't have one." I gave him one of my cards, which I hand out to people saying, "Don't pay it, it's treason." And he was slightly intrigued and said to me, well, and I said, the evidence is incontrovertible because of the NIST report and the fact that World Trade Center 7 fell in freefall for 2.25 seconds. He looked completely mystified. And cut a very long story short, David, we ended up in court in Horsham on February the 25th. And so I found myself standing before a district judge who really didn't know what to do with it. I'd brought over witnesses like Niels Harrit, who was one of the sort of pioneering scientists on the thermitic materials in the World Trade Center dust, Tony Farrell, former senior police intelligence officer for South Yorkshire Police. Oh, crikey. I had about 6 witnesses. Ian Henschel, one of the leading authors on 9/11 in the UK, Adrian Mallett, former firefighter and engineer, Peter Drew, who's coordinated the campaign against the BBC, trying to get them to tell us where they got the information on World Trade Center 7. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. Ray Savage, a former anti-terrorist officer in the UK, and we had a very good lineup of witnesses, and the judge and 150 people turned up, by the way, to watch the trial.
All right.
And couldn't get into the courtroom because it only accommodated 35 people. And the judge didn't really know what to do with it. His hands were tied. He said, "Well, listen, I can only deal with the litigation at hand, and that is that you don't have a TV license." And I said, "Well, no, I don't. I'm guilty on that count, sir." And but he knew, he'd seen the evidence pre-trial. He has to study it. Obviously, I'd submitted an hour-long video on World Trade Center 7 with my evidence, and of course all the eyewitness evidence by people like Craig Bartmer, who was the New York Police Department guy who was next to World Trade Center 7 when it went down, who'd heard the explosions, etc. So it was, I mean, and that's a tiny fraction of it, and yeah, he was very, very fair, I have to say. I think he was fair. And he said, listen, I can't deal with that today. I don't have the power to deal with that today. But normally what would happen, David, is that you would be given a £1,000 fine for not having a TV license for as long as I did, which I think was about 2006. And I wasn't fined a penny, not a penny.
That's interesting.
And
after seeing the evidence, he didn't fine you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just had to pay. You just had to pay court costs. Was the only.
I paid £200 court costs, which was the lowest. I was told by the prosecution, who had seen films that I'd made. Which the first film I'd made was called Reasonable Cause, which was really a compilation of people like Dylan Avery and Dave von Kleist. But it was concentrating on the legislation that we have in the UK on terrorism, which is specifically. In this country, it's called Section 15, Article 3, which if you have reasonable cause to believe that you could be funding the purposes of terrorism, then you don't pay. So that was the legislation I was using going in to argue against the BBC that I had reasonable cause because of the Building 7 story not to pay. And the judge was evidently swayed. And the prosecutor, I won't mention his name, did actually donate to my costs. So that's usually a good sign, I think.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, even as Alex has pointed out recently, and he started to make an issue out of it, it's become mainstream news that our government not only created Al-Qaeda, but is even running Al-Qaeda. So even if you follow their official story, it looks as if they're funding terrorism, and it's basically reported, but you know they don't pay any attention to that. I mean, look at Libya and the other places; they're their agents in those places. But we want to stay on 9/11 because that's where you've been focused for several years, and you've got an interesting project that's coming up. But before we talk about that project, I had seen another documentary that you did about Tony Farrell, and he's a police investigator who basically woke up a couple of years ago about this, and Alex has interviewed him. It's an excellent documentary. I'd like to show people a real quick clip of that, just to get a feel for the kind of work that you do, because it's a very good quality documentary work that you do, Tony.
Thank you.
I can reflect back now on the moment when it dawned on me, and this was just a very quick realization. Oh my God! And pardon me for blaspheming here. Once that electric light bulb switches on, your whole world changed. Mine did, because it was almost like instantly I realised that for the best part of 9 years I'd been deluded about 9/11. What told me that something was radically wrong with 9/11 did not come from anything internal in the police information system. On the contrary, it all was available to anybody, any researcher, anybody with an interest who's willing to look at this with an open mind.
So tell me how you found Tony Farrell. Backstory on this documentary.
I was in a car, and a friend of mine who knew I was interested in 9/11 showed me a cutting from the Sun newspaper, which is in my opinion, lest we get into legal problems, a despicable rag that we have over here, and it's probably the top-selling newspaper in the country, and depicted Tony as this kind of nutty former intelligence officer who'd lost his job because he'd spoken truth to power, if you will, about 9/11. He'd stumbled into some documentaries like Loose Change, In Plain Sight, and films like that, and had been asked to submit what he called a terror threat matrix report. It was his job to assess the terror threat in the constabulary where he worked. That's the police department where he worked, which was South Yorkshire Police. I don't know if any of your viewers are aware of South Yorkshire Police, but they don't have a very good reputation anymore. They covered up a serious footballing incident in the UK where lots of people died, and they claimed that it was the football supporters' fault, and it wasn't the football supporters' fault, it was the police's fault. And that's now big news over here. So anyway, I got in touch with Tony one way or the other and said, I'm very interested in what you've done. would you mind if I came up and sort of stayed with you for a while and filmed you and made this little film called Offensive, which I made for about £1,000. That's including the camera and the very cheap sound equipment that I had, and stole lots of other people's fine work to sort of beef the film up. And he's an incredible guy. He's a lovely man, a Christian guy. And yeah, he lost everything. He had a £30,000 a year job. Had been a senior intelligence officer with South Yorkshire Police for over a decade, well over a decade, and had woken up very, very quickly, as I think the clip you've shown has told us. And
well, I'm sorry to hear that he's lost his job, but you know he has his integrity, and you can't put a price on that.
Absolutely,
and he's going to stand, I think, as an example to a lot of people. Now, this next project that you're doing is kind of an extension of that. Is that correct? Aren't you going to talk to multiple police detectives about 9/11? Or?
Yeah, I mean, for me, David, I think I'm the son of a former detective sergeant in the UK, and I come from a pretty well policed background. My sister was a police officer, my brother-in-law, and I was going to be one, but I'm very badly colorblind, so I couldn't be. But so when I woke up to 9/11, it's occurred to me in recent years that the public, I don't know, they're still asleep, and really at the end of the day, we really need to wake up the law enforcers and the Army and then the Air Force and the Navy, maybe to get their weapons turned around because they're pointed at the wrong people. But the police, certainly, that they need to be aware of the fact that that they are working for these people who orchestrate this awful stuff, Operation Northwoods, Operation Gladio, which I know I'm preaching to the converted here, which I did mention in court. And so what I want to do, going back to the court case, is invite a jury, albeit with no legal powers as such, to review the evidence that we should have shown at Horsham. We weren't allowed to show at Horsham, which is where we had the BBC 9/11 court case, and let them review it. Retired police officers. We're going to try and get a few judges as well, and see what they think. Let them look at this evidence. Let them look at World Trade Center 7, the free fall, which is listed in the NIST report, as you well know. And see the conclusions they come to, and unless they want to, yeah, sorry, go on.
That's an excellent idea, especially because of the mockumentaries that we've seen come out of the BBC about 9/11, essentially getting straw men, conspiracy theorists that are not quite all together there, not really looking seriously at the questions, the unanswered questions. That's a great idea to get people that the public would trust to thoughtfully examine the evidence as you present it to them, evidence that perhaps they haven't seen, especially haven't seen if they're watching mainstream news, the BBC and American media. They would not have seen that. It's a great idea for a film project. Now, you're self-financing this off of your website, is that correct?
Yeah, Killing Auntie Films. Auntie is, I'm going to sound very posh now, it's a metaterial sobriquet. The BBC in England is referred to as Auntie. It's an affectionate title, Auntie Beeb, Auntie BBC.
Oh, okay. And it made no sense to me whatsoever. Now it makes sense. Okay, it's a British perspective.
Dreadfully pretentious, but it's yeah, it's I used to work for the BBC, and I was very proud, David. I was very proud when I got my job with the BBC. It's a good job, and it's a highly thought of, was a highly thought of institution. Not so much nowadays. They've had a paedophile ring discovered inside.
That's right,
it. And,
with Jimmy Savile, and even some evidence that Scotland Yard was giving celebrity pedophiles a pass and that sort of thing. So looks like the corruption at the BBC and Scotland Yard, they've really gotten some black eyes, as they should.
Absolutely, absolutely. They've really let themselves down. I mean, they still make wonderful wildlife programs, etc., etc. But the news department certainly, and the documentary department has really, like you say, let themselves down. So that's what we're really concentrating on. And yeah, to get this jury together of people to look at the 9/11 evidence, because they have really smeared the 9/11 truth movement so unfairly. They've breached every charter that they're meant to have, because they're a publicly funded organization. They're not like I don't know, ABC or NBC. Not that they're reputable news channels. Don't get me wrong. I've lived in America, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, they aren't. We don't believe they are.
No.
It's a great idea, and consider looking at Kickstarter, that sort of thing here in the States. You might find that might be useful for you. I'm real excited to see that. You've got a background in your family of police detective, and one of my favorite documentarians here in the U.S. is Errol Morris, and he did a movie a few years ago, The Thin Blue Line. I think it was one of the first ones that he did, and it was a real groundbreaking film, and it was done so well. He's such a good interrogator, such a good investigator. They actually got the guy that was on death row off of death row. He found the real killer. And, and it occurred to me when I was thinking about those parallels, that's really what we're doing here. For the last 10 years, we've seen our liberties on death row, and we've been seeing them go one by one with the excuse that they're to blame for 9/11. And we've seen it used as justification for wars. We've seen people really die because of this, foreign wars. And now we see a military buildup here in the United States. I don't know if you're aware of it. We've been covering it on InfoWars, the massive ammunition purchases, the massive purchases of armored personnel carriers, 2,700 of them. So we're seeing the federalization and the militarization of the police. We're seeing them turn into a standing army under the direction of Homeland Security. And the cover story for all of this is 9/11. Yeah, and so we need to find out who the real perpetrators are. And we need to get our people and our liberties off of death row, just like Errol Morris did in Thin Blue Line. Sounds like you've got a great idea to do that. Thanks, Tony, for filling us in on what's going on. Best of luck with your documentary. And if people want to contribute to that, that's killingantifilms.co.uk.
Yeah, Killing Anti-Films, there's a donation page. If anyone wants to chip in, that would be greatly appreciated. It's something that can be copied in any country as well. I mean, we're working closely with architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth in the States and the UK branch as well. And if they want to chip in, please, because we've got to pay for these retired police officers to come down to London, put them up.
Oh, absolutely.
And have a multi-camera shoot as well, because we're going to rent a big venue in London, hopefully get 450, 500 people to watch this thing. But it can be replicated in the US. I know John Meadows is an ex-highway patrol guy that you've got over there, and he's one of the initiators of Police for 9/11 Truth. And, let's get this thing rolling, because, police forces can't ignore their own colleagues. I mean, they're not inhuman, they're not robots. We know at the higher levels, the higher echelons, yes, they are corrupt, bent, as we call them in the UK. But to my mind, as a filmmaker and someone comes from a police family, they're human beings, and they could have been. Well, I mean, how many people were killed on 9/11? Police officers, 60 odd.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And these people, this is creeping fascism, creeping Nazism. Let's get rid of it. And please, if any of your viewers would like to go to Killing Anti-Films and chip in, please do. And you will get a credit on the movie. And anyone who donates $50 gets a free DVD. Free DVD. There you go. That's the pitch. Thank you very much for that, by the way.
And that's .co.uk. It's not .com. It's .co.uk. I
believe it's it's a UK. I've just put in Killing Anti-Films on Google. It will come up.
All right.
And thanks very much for giving that a plug.
Super. Best of luck to you. Thank you, Tony.
Give my regards to Mr. Jones. Thank you, David.
Will do. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Well, that's a very important project. We have 9/11 documentaries on InfoWarsShop.com. It's how we fund our operation. We have a package, Experts Speak Out special. It's got the 9/11 explosive evidence and the Toronto hearings. And don't forget to pick up the new issue of our monthly magazine, Welcome to Planet Hoax. Yeah, it's April, and it came out on April 1st. But, the biggest hoax ever perpetuated on the planet is September 11th. And a great way to wake people up is with that special, or with other films that we have on our site. And you can see all the films that we have that Alex has produced if you become a PrisonPlanet.tv member. You can not only give out the nightly news to 10 friends at a time, can watch it simultaneously, but you can also watch all the documentaries that Alex has produced. Well, that's it for the news. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 Eastern.